Ancient Egyptians inherited 40,000 precision granite vases. What the? Righto, and g'day again, punters. Okay, it's time to look at those vases. Let's go.
All of my content on this topic has centered on this single artifact, but I'm very happy to say that since then, the team has been able to inspect, scan, and analyze several more examples. This is thanks primarily to a new friend of mine, an individual who, since the Vase project was announced, has managed to acquire over a dozen of these ancient and very expensive artifacts. In some ways, the Vase is similar to the golden record fixed to the side of the Voyager spacecraft. On the side of it is a golden record, with pictures and mathematics depicting our species, our technology, capability, and location. While Voyager, with its golden disk, was sent through space, the Vase, with its encoded messages, has been sent through time. Primarily because it's particularly thin-walled and delicate. Even though it's made from granite, it's a minor miracle that it's still in such good condition after millennia. The material thickness on this artifact ranges from 4 down to an astonishing 2 millimeters, less than a tenth of an inch. In fact, a few of these vases were unable to be centered on the rotab due to damage, and 1 or 2 of them show signs of repair where they've been glued back together, perhaps after they were found broken.
What civilization sends vital messages to the future hidden on a 2 millimeter thin vase that has to be glued together, assuming it survives by miracle? Not a smart civilization.
Pre-dynastic, meaning it's classified based on its form and where it was found in a pre-dynastic burial, that it was made before the civilization known as dynastic Egypt ever started, which is estimated to be around 3150 BC, over 5,000 years. Briefly return to the topic of provenance of the vases. As I mentioned in the introduction, several in the currently available collection have impeccable provenance going back to the 1800s and were known to exist in many museum collections, and many of them are also classified as being pre-dynastic. The pre-dynastic period itself is quite a wide range. It might be from several hundred years before 3150 BC, which is when the dynastic civilization started, or it might be 10,000 or more years before this. Dates for pre-dynastic burials from this period come sometimes from carbon dating, sometimes from other indicators. From what I can tell, most of the images and even recreations of pre-dynastic burials all seem quite similar. A primitive, shallow grave with a skeleton or skeletons in the fetal position, and often accompanied by primitive hand-formed pottery, bead and bone ornaments and tools, and occasionally, of course, hard stone vases. This is true for burials of the Nadak culture, a precursor culture close to the time of the early dynastic period, and it's also true for far older burials like that of Toshka that I've mentioned before, dated to 14,000 years ago. While Toshka might be an outlier in terms of dating, it's certainly not the only one that stretches far back into time. In fact, one of the vases in the current collection also comes from very deep antiquity and has impeccable provenance.
So this one was brought out by the Czechoslovakian ambassador to Egypt in the late 1800s, and provenance is indisputable, regarded as pre-dynastic, found in a pre-dynastic burial where, the carbon dating results in something that's maybe 8,000-9,000 BC.
Wow.
Not exactly, but
Vases are important, and this is where it connects to everything else, is the vases are incontrovertibly pre-dynastic. These things, it's not a controversial thing to say that these existed long before dynastic Egypt ever started. Go to any museum in the world, go to the pre-dynastic section, you'll see precision-made stone vases from hard materials attributed to the Naqada and the Naqada II cultures, and they stretch way back 14,000 years ago. Some of the oldest examples, and people get really worked up about this site when I mention it, but Toshka, a lot of these sites are now underwater since they built the Aswan Dam and they flooded this region. There are tons of photos in the Luxor Museum of this. You can see fields of vases. It might be a little tough to see in this image, but you can literally see vases just laying out on the ground out here. And these go back to sites that are all carbon dated to like 14,000 years. I can tell you for sure, like Adam Young, who spoke this morning, he owns a vase. It's not controversially dated. It goes back about 9,000 years. It was given as a gift to a Czech ambassador in the 1930s, eventually found its way onto the private antiquities market where he purchased it.
And they date back. It's what's interesting to me about these is that they're some of the earliest types of artifacts that we find. They stretch back far into what we'd call pre-dynastic time, basically Mesolithic times. Right back to even 15,000 years ago, there was a site called Toshka that was dug up. It's underwater now, but and it was a primitive burial. There was a guy that was curled up in this burial site on the side.
This is the Bode Cemetery 23. It's in the flooded region again. We can see similar vessels here up top, a stone vessel, and then look at that, looks like exactly like the Nakata style vase, which is a few hundred miles to the north. Some of these areas are now recognized as being far older than even Nakata was. Again, unmummified bodies, a lot more pottery than stone, very few tools, same as Nakata. This is a different site. We see large stone plates here. I think they're pretty accurate. I've seen some that are and some that aren't. Again, though, primitive people. They were herders and farmers. Okay, maybe this is more evidence that these were heirlooms. Now, Ben Van Kerkwijk of Uncharted X, he's talked about Toshka for a while now. Radiocarbon dating was done here, showing dates of 12,000 to 14,500 BC. So that's just before the last ice age ended, and I think before the onset of the Younger Dryas, which I know Randall spoke about yesterday a bit. So these are all below the Nile River, below the floodwaters of Lake Nasser. And this carbon dating was just done in the 60s. So not too long ago, but still 60-something years ago. However, the bulls, don't forget, we know how old they are. They're 3,000 and 4,000 years old. They haven't been changed. They haven't been updated, despite this, right? So that's not how science is supposed to work.
These things had to have been made on a machine and made with extreme precision, because this vase that is igneous stone, a very, very hard stone, very hard to work, but also brittle when it becomes thin. You can see how thin that interior wall is. There's 50,000 plus of them were discovered beneath the step pyramid of Djoser. In
fact, one of the vases in the current collection also comes from very deep antiquity and has impeccable provenance.
So this one was brought out by the Czechoslovakian ambassador to Egypt in the late 1800s, and provenance is indisputable.
Unfortunately, this provenance is very peccable and very disputable, because there never was an ambassador of Czechoslovakia to Egypt in the late 1800s.
And provenance is indisputable.
This provenance is either erroneous or made up. Here's why. 1. There had never been a country called Czechoslovakia prior to 1918. Historically, there was Bohemia, today's Czech Republic, but in the 1800s it was part of Austria-Hungary. 2. Very few ambassadors, if any at all, were in Egypt in the 1800s. Before the founding of the League of Nations, ambassadors were rare and only sent to major powers. Missions to lesser countries, like Egypt in the 1800s, were headed by consuls, agents, etc. The first Czechoslovakian consulate in Egypt opened only in 1920, and it became an embassy in 1956. If this provenance story stems from some mistake, it has to be corrected. As stated, the story can't be true. As far as documentation, there's an odd contrast between how measurements and provenance are treated. The measurements are shown and scans published. The provenance is only asserted. No actual documents are ever shown. The same applies to carbon dating.
The carbon dating results in something that's named at 9,000 BC.
A claim is made, but no data shown, in contrast to scientific papers, where data is open for public scrutiny. The original scanned vase is called pre-dynastic.
Scan and analysis of a pre-dynastic granite vase, and it was made before the civilization known as Dynastic Egypt ever started.
False. Such vases can be pre-dynastic, early dynastic, or even Old Kingdom.
Ultimately, it doesn't matter to me if this vase is considered pre-dynastic or if it's from the Old Kingdom.
It's irrelevant what matters to the vase scan project. The correct term for this vase style, and thus its alleged origin, is pre-dynastic, early dynastic, or Old Kingdom. Next is a claim that seems to be an outright lie. First, the description of the original vase.
Even with the OG vase, the original granite vase, with a known history going back to the 1980s.
So its history goes only to the 1980s, and its age is only guessed from the style and material.
How do we know if it is really pre-dynastic? I'm personally confident that it is. It certainly matches the form and style of other pre-dynastic vases on display in museums, and it's made from the same rose granite as is the box in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid.
But in a subsequent video, a striking new claim is added.
Based on its form and where it was found in a pre-dynastic burial,
If the provenance only goes to 1980s, and the age is only guessed from appearance, how do we know it was found in a pre-dynastic burial? If there's no documentation of this find, it sounds like an outright lie. Given the false claims and the lack of provenance documents, it's strange to hear complaints about lack of response.
the objection or coherent responses to this data, it's been radio silence.
You can't complain about indifference at the scientific level if you don't offer provenance documentation that's on the same level.
From an earlier video I did about the 40,000 vases found beneath the step pyramid of Jose of granite and diorite, and that this myth is false. But so there's a step pyramid. There are all these very elaborate tunnels and passages running underneath Imhotep Museum in Saqqara, and thanks to a viewer, Red Dark Bull, for supplying this. This is part of a display on the wall, and so where did this myth originate of 40,000 vases of hard stone, which people usually just take to mean granite? Well, it's here at the museum itself. More than 40,000 vases carved from hard stone were discovered in the galleries beneath the stepped pyramid. And just to highlight it, 40,000 vases carved from hard stone. Well, what is a hard stone? This could be argued, but also beneath the fuller display there also shows this map and these pictures. Now, you see the map on the side, maybe the resolution doesn't quite show, but it says from Lerner, this map, and from Lauer, this photo. So we'll look at the Jean-Pierre Lauer, 1939, in his book, volume, I think it was 35. Either way, link will be in the description to this, and amongst the maps and illustrations at the end is the stepped pyramid. So we see the pyramid itself, and then these shafts and the tunnels which lead underneath, and there you can see, you get an idea of the complex that runs underneath. Now, it was here that the vases, well, let's be accurate, stone vessels were found, and the majority of those were alabaster, calcite. Well, all stone is hard. Anyway, but we'll look at that. So again, that's from Lauer again, and just another illustration of the design of a step pyramid and those tunnels underneath. If we go back to that display there at the Saqqara Museum, you see this map here. I'll just flip it and orientate it. They're even pointing to these two galleries, and those are galleries 6 and 7. And they're even numbered, like 6 and 7, and one runs, so gallery 6 runs over the top of gallery 7 is another piece. So at the very top you see gallery 6 and gallery 7. You can see there gallery 7 is underneath gallery 6, but in number 7, amongst the illustrations, you even see that they've shown on what part of, so basically at the bottom of the shaft, all these vases were stacked. There's like a 33 metres, 108 feet down, and also on the top you can see gallery 6 has got the same piles of those vases there. Or stone vessels, let's be accurate, because they come in many shapes, but Quibble writes about this as well, and just to put the uninscribed dishes, if not broken, okay, but the important part, by December 34, about 2,225 boxes have been filled in the season, 3,116 in all. If we suppose the average contains 4 to 5 vases in fragments, some 15,000 already await reconstruction. Now, earlier also writes about, we'll see the photos in a minute, we'll just go through the photos, and but also a great point is the greater number by far are shallow bowls and dishes and are of alabaster. Let's just look at the photos of how these were found. These are from Gallery 6, and it's amongst the vases, but it's piles and piles of broken pieces of dishes and shallow bowls, and that's why they were able to be stacked up so many. If there were 40,000 vases such as those, it'd be a lot large. It would be a very large area, and roof collapse. They were stored in they were put inside in boxes. These deteriorated. There was a roof collapse, and you can see they were just scraping them out with adze. Now, even now, what would you do with this? Like it's Anyway, I've seen allegations of cover up because there's this trash outside the step pyramid when they did the renovation. Well, that's a hell of a job to do, to try and make sense out of these pieces. Again, you can just see shallow bowls, dishes, and amongst them some of the vases. Now, the vases are survive better because they've got really thick walls in comparison to those very thin, shallow dishes. And it's actually from this photo in Gallery 6 that the one in the museum is there, so you can see, compare those two, just do an overlay. Right, so 40,000 stone vessels, an estimate based on the number of shards. And again, this was what they had to work with and come back. So out of these 40,000, they also said it was only about 100 pieces, museum quality, that were of special significance, and even most of those had to be reconstructed, rebuilt. And he talks about the workers and their exceptional memory, where they remember, 1 year ago I saw a piece that would fit that, but that's linked in the description too there. Now, we're in Gallery 6 still, but now we see A and C, not B, but they seem to be of the volcanics like granite or a similar stone there, as opposed to the alabaster. Still, now we're in Gallery 7, December 33, and you can see one of these. The darker dishes would be an indication that they're not alabaster or calcite, which has that very light colour. And I've got a better resolution one just to show. And here we have what appears to be one of the smaller diorite vessels, but again mostly dishes and bowls which can be made. We've got some demo videos where the second one, it took me like 5 hours to make one, so these would absolutely be able to be pumped out by any sort of individuals making them, but if it was done in a workshop environment, that would become every half an hour one would be coming off the production line if you only had like 5 or 6 people working it. But in this photo we start to see these more significant, important, the harder stones, granite and that type of stone. You can see those in the pile. That was in Gallery 7, this photo, which I also have notice this photo, we've just got the big black sheet in there in the background, and then we can see that it's exactly the same collection. They've just lowered the sheet there, and 30% seem to be alabaster there, and then we do have these harder stone vessels, and as they point out, these were exceedingly rare, and tend to be, well, Gallery 7 was probably the best single collection as far as I know of any one place. There are other tombs where they find these extraordinary types of stone vessels, but it was here underneath at Saqqara, the sheer number of them as a whole, but alabaster dishes and bowls, but also these larger pieces of alabaster and these other things. So the worldwide collection comes nowhere near close to what many people would assume. This is another photo. So there was just piles and piles of these broken pieces. They brought them out into boxes, and then started the monumental task of trying to repiece and put as many as they could back together. As it says, they were focusing on the ones that were exceptional in being very ornate, or the ones that had carved inscriptions on them.
A number of false claims about the pre-dynastic Naqada culture are made in this context. Let's briefly go through these.
They were found in the Naqada culture, Naqada 1, Naqada 2. These are the precursors to the dynastic Egyptians. You're talking like 7,000 BC.
No, Naqada carbon dates to only 3,900 BC. Sounds like someone's trying to fudge the numbers by 3,000 years.
Everything else you find from these cultures, from these times, it's bone, it's beads, very primitive. They have to admit that there's literally no other stonework being done like this at that time. There's no statuary, there's no architecture.
We wouldn't exactly call the massive Nakata royal tomb no architecture, given that its facade defined an art motif for the next few thousand years, including in Giza. These delicate ivory reliefs aren't exactly just bone. These finely crafted palettes and soft stone vessels don't really qualify as mere beads, and neither does the great mace head of the Scorpion King. There is one excavation photo that may actually show a grave with a stone jar in situ. This is Petrie's photo from Nakata, previously unpublished, so the vase type is unknown. The photo on the left is unidentified. This page says it's from Nakata 3, without naming the source. There's no evidence that any vessels in this photo are made of stone. The label just says containers and pots. Neither photo adds anything new to the subject, because Nakata hardstone vases are well known, and no one disputes this. Again, why show photos which bring nothing new to the table? An art dealer is named, seemingly to add credibility.
The two other precision-made rose granite vessels are classified as pre-dynastic, like the original vase, and have established provenance going back to the 1960s, when they were acquired and then held in the personal collection of antiquities dealer Fayez Baccarat, the fifth-generation owner of a globally very well-known establishment in Israel.
The credibility problem here is that on his own page, Mr. Barakat says that he deals with Maya crystal skulls. Yes, crystal skulls, most of which turned out to be 19th century fakes, made in Germany, in crystal likely from Brazil or Madagascar. Here's a crystal skull from Mr. Barakat's catalog. Aztec colonial, 14th to 16th century. Origin Mexico, collection pre-Columbian. We can't comment on this specific one, as its story is not given. Many of the well-known crystal skulls trace back to a French art dealer, Eugene Boban. It's disputed if all crystal skulls are fake. The author of the original paper thinks so. As the origin of the vases is already uncertain, their being near the subject of crystal skulls is not good. By the way, Mr. Barakat's bio says Maya skulls. The catalog says Aztec. If both refer to the same skull, somebody should get their cultures straight. Museums, some in private collections. Unless a vase can be traced to a specific site, we can't be sure it's authentic. This applies to both private collections and museums. Proponents of ancient high technology scanned a number of vases from private collections. A few of the scanned vases, not all, show surface precision of a few thousandths of an inch. As shown in our previous video on this subject, these tolerances are about what you get on a random modern cemetery vase, made in a random Chinese workshop. This level of precision usually comes from stable, rotary, well-centered motion, that is, something lathe-like, though not necessarily a modern lathe. Members of the vase scan team say that this is too precise for early ancient Egypt. They propose that ancient Egypt inherited such hard stone vases from an even older civilization.
Which begs the question, do you think those pre-dynastic people made these vessels? There's no indication that they did. We don't know how old they are. I think this is a fundamental concept when it comes to looking at the mysteries of ancient Egypt, this idea of inheritance. They're just not going back far enough.
That civilization, which existed more than 10,000 years ago, supposedly had high technology, such as precise, powered machines. When such claims about precise stone vases are made, a burial site named Toshka is often brought up, usually presented as these photos. Seeing this slide, the viewer assumes that this is a photo of a display in some museum because of the label. Maybe the two photos have been repositioned to be closer, but any rational person will think that this label informs us about the two photos. The big caption on top also tells us that everything we see is related to Toshka. But this is not true. Yes, there is, or rather was, a real ancient burial site called Toshka. Today it's under Lake Nasser. It was found in mid-1960s by Fred Wendorf, and it really dated back more than 10,000 years. But no stone jars nor even pottery was ever found there, only small lithics and stones for grinding. Here are all the graves from Toshka 8905. The photo on the right is not from Toshka at all. This photo was taken in 1907 by George Reisner in Shalal near Aswan. Here's the original. Moreover, none of the vessels in this photo are made of stone. We know this because Reisner described each grave. Here it is, grave 149. All 5 vessels in this grave are pink or brown ware. These are types of pottery. The photo on the right is not from Toshka, and there are no stone vessels in it at all. What about the other photo? Well, it's a complete mystery. In another presentation on stone vases, we see what looks like a museum label saying it's from Toshka 8905. The big problem here is that this photo does not appear anywhere in Wendorf's mid-60s reports on Toshka, nor even in any of Reisner's reports from his 1907-1911 work. The time and place of this photo is a mystery. Let's list the possibilities. 1. It's an unpublished photo by Wendorf from Toshka 8905. But the details don't look right because we have actual photos from that site. At Toshka 8905, Wendorf had a tall sun umbrella and a portable table near the site. We also see a man in dark clothes and a wide-brimmed hat. We don't see these in the mysterious photo supposedly from there. Possibility 2. It's an unpublished photo from Toshka by Wendorf, but not from site 8905. But in our context of stone vases, it still wouldn't matter, because Wendorf did not find any stone jars at any site in Toshka, only small lithic tools and stones for grinding. Finally, possibility 3. This photo is from some other expedition, and the museum mislabeled it. There were many expeditions to that area, so viewers with too much time on their hands can go through all their reports and try to ID this photo. There's actually yet another version of this now infamous Toshka Museum display, where we see yet another photo.
They come to us from sites that have been dated as far back as 14,500 years at a place called Toshka. This is a picture of it. You can quite clearly see there are vessels laying around all over the place.
Except again, this photo is not from Toshka. It was taken in 1907 at Maris Markos by Reisner. This is the inventory of this site, 41,300. There were no stone jars found there, just pottery. Besides Toshka, we're shown other sites, supposedly with hard stone vases.
Here's some more examples from areas like Toshka. If you take a close-up look at this one up top here, this absolutely looks like stone to me. This image, the zoom in of this image here. And then something else interesting is happening even in these very ancient pre-dynastic burials. We have imitation going on. This is a pottery vessel. You see the spirals on it? So in a pre-dynastic burial, you already have pots where they are trying to make the pottery look like hard stone vessels.
This is grave 23-1, found in Daybod by Reisner in 1907. Nothing in this grave imitates anything else in this grave, because everything we see is pottery. Next photo.
This is a different site. We see large stone plates here.
Maris Markos, site 41, graves 401 through 403, 1907, Reisner. No stone jars or stone plates. It's all pottery.
And they were being buried with them in these sites that go back as far as nearly 15,000 years ago. Who knows how much further? We just don't know.
To recap this section, any notion that stone jars in Egypt date to 12 or 14,000 years BC just went up in a puff of smoke. No stone jars were ever found in Toshka 8905, or any sites of that age. Only small lithic tools and stones for grinding. Most, if not all, images in Toshka photo montages like this one are from other sites. A certain Mark Quist wrote a math analysis of the original vase, claiming unusual properties. The vase scan team sounds enamored with these findings.
His work and conclusions are truly revelatory and should shock anyone with an open-minded interest in the study of our past.
It is indeed shockingly easy to fool people with statistical shell games. There's a book called How to Lie with Statistics. The math analysis of the vase sounds like a compilation of statistical fallacies from this book. Let's take the claims one by one. The author computed all ratios between 7 dimensions of the vase, shown here. In 3 of those ratios, he found links to math constants like pi or phi. Only one ratio is an unmodified number. The others are indirect derivatives. Squares, divisions, or combinations thereof. Note, derivative here just means a number derived from another through some operation, not the calculus derivative. The author says that such ratios occurring by chance would be superstitious and magical thinking. False. These ratios are exactly what's statistically expected. Let's see why. Here's a grade school number line. Dimensions of objects are positive, so we'll only deal with positive numbers. Viewers probably think of the ratios as any random number anywhere on the number line, but it's not the case. We're dealing with a compact object with very specific dimensions. There will never be a ratio of, say, 500, because our vase doesn't have very long parts, like a very long panhandle. Similarly, we're not dealing with microscopic dimensions like crystals or molecules, so there will never be a ratio as small as, say, 0.01. In fact, we're sampling random numbers from a very specific small range. What's the range? It's simple. Just take the smallest dimension you're considering, divide it by the largest dimension, then do the inverse, and you've got your range. At this point, you can forget the vase, because mathematically, all we're doing is sampling random numbers from this range. Recall that the analysis considers not just unmodified numbers, but also derivatives, such as power of 2, combinations thereof, etc. How common are such derivatives and combinations of math constants in our range? Let's take a list of mathematical constants. These are just the well-known ones. The full list has 115. For each one, we'll generate derivatives. The power of 2, multiplication by 2, and division by another constant and its derivatives, since that's what's in the analysis. Multiplication by 2 accounts for using both diameters and radii. Note, valid experiments rely on clear predictions, in our case, defining all constants and derivatives beforehand. You do not get to select which constants or derivatives you accept after the fact to fit the results. If you do this, you're not doing science, but what the ancients called foretelling after the fact, aka making stuff up as you go along. Here's our previously established range. What happens if we plot our constants and derivatives using the max error allowed in the analysis? Turns out all the constants and their derivatives occupy 15.2% of our range. And no, these are not discrete isolated points. Because of the allowed error, these are small rectangles. In the range between 0.16 and 1, they actually occupy the majority of the number line. In plain English, it means that on our vase, the ratio of any two dimensions has a 1 in 7 chance of hitting a constant or its derivative within the margin of error. How many total ratios do we have? For 7 dimensions, the number of permutations of 2 at a time is 42. Given 42 ratios and 1 in 7 chance of hitting a constant or its derivative, why would 3 hits be a surprise? If anything, we would expect 1 or 2 more. What happens with more simple derivatives such as cubes, square roots, cube roots, multiplications by 2 and 3, and divisions by derivatives of another number? At 61% coverage within the range, it's now more likely for any ratio to hit a constant or its derivative, rather than not hit it. Next, the analysis proposes something called radial traversal pattern. If you're puzzled by this phrase, don't be. It's just a pretentious way of saying, I fit a function to cherry-picked points with the same distribution and this is supposed to be news. Let's explain. The author proposes that a math function dictates the sizes of the circular features of the vase. That is, almost all radii in the vase's shape fit this function. The author doesn't label which radius is supposed to fit which function value. We have to reconstruct these. Let's start with a minor issue. The gap between the biggest proposed circle and the outside of the vase is about 267 microns. Right off the bat, the max deviation is about 4 times worse than what's claimed by the analysis. Issue 2. This circle is disqualified. Here's why. The only reason this circle can be established is point B. To define point B, the author claims that the region above the handles is divided in 2 horizontal halves, a slightly curved half and a flat half. Point B supposedly defines tangency to the flat or conical half. The author really needs this point because he wants to establish a 1 radian angle between the tangents. But there's no flat part there. As seen in this close-up, the region above the handles is just a single, very big arc. Let's make this arc horizontal for more resolution. The vase outline, in white, forms a symmetric arc between the green and yellow lines defining its bounds. You can fit a cone to any point on this arc, but no point on this arc is special or different from others. There is no flat section and no point B defining it. Instead of 12 claimed circles, we have 11. We'll now explain how statistical distributions dismantle the whole claim of circle sizes matching a function being something unusual. A key rule to remember: different sets of random values have different distributions. For example, let's look at a boxy car from the 70s. On the car's body, for any two lines that meet at an angle anywhere, are the angles completely random without any pattern? Not at all. 90-degree angles, in green, predominate. If we plotted these angles on a chart, they wouldn't be completely random values between 0 and 180 like this. Instead, they'd form a bell curve centered on 90. There are other distributions, like the brightness of stars. When plotted, we see that there are very few very bright stars and hundreds of thousands of dim stars. All these distributions have math functions that describe them. So when random values in some set fit a function that describes this set's distribution, it's not magic. It's simply a function doing what it was meant to do: describe this distribution. But what does all this have to do with our vase? Everything, because the round features on the vase also have a certain distribution, and not just one but actually two. Two, because the shape is, in general terms, a sculpted curve revolved around an axis. The smaller arcs that define the curve in a side view, when revolved, turn into full circles in the top view. What's the size distribution of the circles in the top view? It looks like a normal distribution with a peak near the average distance from the axis, maybe with a small skew. The second distribution is that of the arc sizes in the side view. The curved shape has many fillets, small arcs that smoothly blend areas meeting at an angle. In our context, it tells us that very small arcs are highly overrepresented in the arc size distribution. On the other hand, there's only one very big arc, the belly of the vase. In between these two extremes, there are two medium-sized arcs, the handles and the underside of the lip. The distribution of arc sizes in the side view resembles the distribution of star brightness: very few very big arcs, and lots of very small arcs. This tells us that exponential functions are a good fit for such size distribution, just like the function in the analysis. Don't pay any attention to this fraction. It's just a multiplier. It's neither special nor relevant. It's just one of the coefficients in a generic form of the function. What the author doesn't know or doesn't tell you is that there are other functions which can be fit to these values. It's called curve fitting, and it's something statisticians do every day. Except statisticians understand that datasets typically have some distribution, and thus some matching functions. There's no past civilization inserting these functions in the data. Let's do an experiment. It will show that the curve fitting the author has done is nothing special, and can be replicated in this range with many random values, with an exponential distribution. But first, let's note that the author is either careless or disingenuous when matching the function. Most of his radii in this table are for arcs in the side view, marked in green. But he also includes two circles that do not exist in the side view at all. They only exist in the top planar view, as horizontal circles, and they belong to a different type of distribution. What the author is doing is borrowing these two convenient circles from another distribution, and only these two, so that he can beef up his circle count. That's why in the table we marked them in yellow. Technically, they should be removed, but we'll let it slide because it won't matter. Second comment. The author tries to throw a wrench in the works by stipulating only integer input values to the function. This won't matter much either. Now the experiment. In the range defined by the arc sizes in the vase, we generate completely random numbers with an exponential distribution. That is, just like in this table, we'll have more smaller values compared to bigger values. We use the same conditions as the paper. Out of 19 integers, pick 11 and fit a function through 11 of our random values with a given margin of error. Will it work? Yes, just like in the paper. And not just once, many times over and over. Completely random values in our range can be fit to a function on 11 integers, all because our values have the exponential distribution of the arc sizes in the vase. Conclusion: there's absolutely nothing special about the circle sizes in the vase. This entire paper can be summarized as Statistics 101 fail. Apparently, this statistical data mining has now been automated.
This part of the Vase analysis has now been automated with a program designed to find significant ratios once the measurements of the main features have been input.
We can thus expect many more new papers with no math value whatsoever. Let's pose a question. If the vase is authentic, could it have been made in Old Kingdom Egypt? We'll use Old Kingdom as shorthand, also including pre- and early dynastic. A yes answer hinges on two conditions. a very skilled lathe craftsman for the time, and a very stable and robust lathe for its time. Let's start with a skilled artisan. Today we have very skilled lathe artists. The obvious objection is that they work on modern, high-tech machines. But it's not always the case. Some lathe artists today recreate pre-industrial pole lathes or bow lathes, and yet they're still able to achieve great results. This Moroccan lathe artist makes chess pieces on a primitive lathe, using his hands and feet at the same time. Lathe virtuosos existed in the past. Here are two mind-boggling lathe masterpieces. It's hard to grasp how the artist managed to deal with all these axes, or how this tiny spiral staircase can hold the weight above it. They were made in Germany in 1626, at the time the first pilgrims were moving to America. Next are the famous Fatimid rock crystal ewers, from between the 9th and 11th centuries. Each one was made from a single piece of rock crystal, including the handle. The outside wasn't turned on a lathe because of the handle. Also, the Fatimids had iron or even steel tools. But these ewers are relevant here. Why? Because rock crystal can't be worked by hammering, as it would shatter. All work you see is the result of slow, laborious abrasion, both outside and inside. Here's the manufacturing process, reconstructed by Jeremy Johns of Oxford. The raw rock crystal is roughed out with bow saws down to a simplified shape, or a blank. A tube drill bores out a cylinder, the start of the vessel's interior. The hollowing out of the interior proceeds outward from the original cylindrical hole, using implements shaped like forks or egg beaters, driving the motion of an abrasive stone or slurry. The original cylindrical drill core is repurposed to make long vials. Since an even narrower core is then drilled into each vial, it too is repurposed to make smaller items, like beads and buttons. One of the scanned vases has walls 2 millimeters thin.
The material thickness on this artifact ranges from 4 down to an astonishing 2 millimeters.
Outside the carvings, the walls of the ewers are under 2 millimeters thin.
The thickness of the wall on the body is much, much thinner than it is in the neck and on the base. So the neck and the base can be as thick as 8 millimeters. But the wall, away from the relief carving, the wall is usually less than 2 millimeters thick. And that's a remarkable display of bravura from the craftsman.
The relief work is so good that the spots on the animals are actually tiny lenses, each refracting the animal on the other side. Al-Biruni described the trade in crystal goods. He says the appraiser who decides the shape was paid several times more than the workers. If we have a documented manufacture of pure quartz vessels by abrasion, with 2 millimeter thin walls, and to the point of creating miniature lenses, do we really need to explain a similar case elsewhere with some ancient high technology? Speaking of vase craftsmanship in other eras, the handles are an integral part of these vases and were created at the same time as the bodies. The Vase team proposes a manufacturing system that cannot create anything but perfection.
I would agree. I think that would be the strongest argument for the nature of the precision in these vases, is that the tool is incapable of producing anything less precise.
If a tool is incapable of imperfection, why can't it align the sides of the lug handles? Here's the Kolovan vase in St. Petersburg, Russia. 16.5 feet long, 10.5 feet wide, made from a single block of green jasper, Mohs scale roughly the same as granite. It was made in the early 1800s, but still using mostly manual work. Quarrying and carving took about 20 to 30 years. No offense to whoever made the measured vase, but if it were placed in this room on display, 99% of visitors wouldn't even notice it, and the other 1% would wonder what's this ashtray doing here. Let's keep things in perspective when using hyperbolic words for the measured vase.
And I think he's also shown that it would be incredibly difficult to even attempt making something like this today. And we're not even sure we could do it to the level of precision that's shown in this vase today. It may surpass even our capabilities to make in granite.
The target audience for such claims goes all the way, saying, "We couldn't make it today." In many US and European cities, there are granite fountains, often called kugels. In such fountains, a heavy granite sphere hovers on a very thin sheet of water, so it can be moved by hand. We contacted a manufacturer of such spheres. The required accuracy is 0.004 of an inch, or the thickness of a human hair. Currently, the biggest kugel is nearly 9 feet across. In other words, today we can get hair-width accuracy on a nearly 9 feet granite sphere weighing about 60,000 pounds. A vase has a single rotation axis. A kugel must be shaped on all 3 axes. And it's not just the sphere. The granite bowl must have the same accuracy, so the two can glide against each other with a minuscule separation. How minuscule? A physics paper computed the water film to be 0.3 of a millimeter or 1/100th of an inch thin. So we have 2 multi-ton granite objects, each with 0.004 of an inch accuracy, separated by 1/100th of an inch, moving against each other in 3D. Compared to this, a 4-inch vase with 1 rotation axis is an entry-level exercise. A vase is a one-off artistic object, which the artist can spend months or years polishing. The kugels are made in large quantities now, as there are hundreds or more of them installed across the world, so manufacturers have to make them on schedule. How far back in time do kugels go? The oldest existing one is from 1979, but there were older kugels there in 1973. This level of granite manufacturing dates back to early 70s at the latest. But granite doesn't set the records on our ability to polish stone. Quartz does, and it's a bit harder than granite. In 2004, NASA launched a satellite with 2 quartz spheres and a gyroscope. The roundness accuracy of the spheres was 4/10 of an inch. It's about 10,000 times better than the scanned vases. At this level, we're down to atomic scales. The tolerance equates to about 40 layers of atoms. If the quartz sphere were the size of the Earth, the tolerance would be 8 feet. Claiming that today we can't make a small granite vase with accuracy in the single thousandths of an inch indicates detachment from reality. The proponents of ancient high technology can't get enough of the word precision. Yet all examples they give are those of polishing. Polishing is a small minor factor in precision as it's commonly understood. If you asked people what objects manifest precision, most would answer a mechanical watch, an advanced car engine, or a CPU. The precision here, the real one, comprises lots of different intricate parts, with shapes rarely encountered in nature, such as gears, threads, ball bearings, or transistors, all combined in complex, interrelated ways to perform an advanced task. None of the objects proposed as ancient high technology are like this. Using the word precision for them is called equivocation, deceptively using a wide concept for a tiny subset of this concept. Yes, precision created the modern world, as proposed in this book. But it was this precision of complex machines with intricate, interconnected parts. Not polishing. They're not the same thing. The clue is right on the cover. We see a cogwheel and a thread. We don't see a polished vase because it's irrelevant. As shown, we can create well-polished objects like kugels. But do objects like kugels quote-unquote create the modern world? No. It's clocks, engines, and CPUs. In its simplest form, polishing is just prolonged rubbing. It can occur with no human intervention at all, such as the famous glass beach, where the sea turns glass trash into smooth glass pebbles. It can occur with unconscious human intervention. In many places in the world, there are old statues that tourists like to touch. Over time, these spots become very smooth and polished. If a roughness meter showed single microns in such a spot, would it imply advanced technology? No. It's just tedious, persistent rubbing. If ancient Egypt was the heir to an older civilization based on precision, why did we have to wait until ancient Greece, Rome, and China to invent the building blocks of actual useful precision, like gears, ball bearings, or threads? Why didn't ancient Egypt inherit these? The stock answer is that only stone will survive between civilizations. Then why didn't the supposed older advanced civilization record such useful objects in stone for posterity? In the future, if you hear precision in this context, simply read it as polishing. The vase scan team includes a control vase made of marble. Why marble is unclear, as modern granite vases aren't hard to get. The team notices that modern stone vases usually have no handles.
Note also that there are no lug handles here to contend with.
The reason is simple. Unlike today's stone vases, the ancient Egyptian ones were functional, meant for actual daily use, to carry or hold foodstuffs or cosmetics, even if the luxury ones were handled less often. Today we no longer use stone vases in kitchens because we have metal or glass pots and other containers. Making them with handles isn't the slightest problem for us. Stone vases today are purely ornamental, for flowers or ashes, not for frequent use, so they have no lug handles. If a funerary urn today needs handles, they're made of metal, as it's much cheaper. Making a modern stone vase with stone handles will be discussed later. We decided to test an actual modern granite vase. It's a completely random cemetery vase, made by some random manufacturer in China. Let's start with basic caliper measurements. The vase has small bevels at the ends, so the calipers have to be raised a little. Both the top and bottom of the vase, in two directions, have the same dimensions, within the caliper's 1/100th of an inch accuracy. It already tells us we're dealing with a few thousandths of an inch at the most. Next step, a 3D scan with a Carl Zeiss scanner. Here it is. A clean way to visualize surface accuracy is to slice the 3D object in half, then mirror one half of the profile over the other. For example, in the original vase, you can see a disparity of 2.6 thousandth of an inch. Here are the disparities in the original vase, at points evenly distributed over its belly. And here's a random modern granite vase. The surface accuracy is basically the same. Conclusion: the original vase could have been made in a random Chinese workshop which mass-produces granite urns. This is in stark contrast to claims like this.
And I think he's also shown that it would be incredibly difficult to even attempt making something like this today. Not even sure we could do it to the level of precision that's shown in this vase today. It may surpass even our capabilities to make in granite.
Again, hyperbolic claims like this show a disconnect from the real world. As mentioned, modern stone vases usually don't have handles, as they're just ornamental. So we contacted Chinese granite workshops to get a quote on a copy of the original vase with handles. The best offer was $45, 10 pieces minimum. So here's the answer to this question.
I would argue with anyone who would say that that would argue the provenance of these vases. I would ask them to show me how they could make it so cheaply.
Yeah.
This is how, in China. Here's the specific red granite that would be used. The workshop would prefer 15 centimeter height instead of 12, as it better fits their current setup. Note that shipping may be pricey. For 10 granite vases, it may cost as much as making them. So if someone has a spare $1,000 and the Chinese shop is still interested, we can arrange this, on the condition that one vase will be given to this channel for research. How much do such vases sell for?
Up to like $70,000, $80,000, $100,000. The more provenance, the better usually.
If a vase costs $100 to make and you sell it on the antiquities market for $70,000, that's a profit factor of 700x. Forgery for gain is clearly viable. We asked the granite workshops how a vase with handles would be made. They were a bit reluctant, maybe thinking competition will get an inside look into their business. By the way, this can shed light on why we won't see depictions of more advanced fabrication in Egyptian art. If you're making money selling well-made vases to the pharaoh, you're not going to show the details to others. Anyway, we got the answer. A ring shaped like the handles is left around the vase. Between the handles, the extra stock is removed with a grinder to within a few millimeters of the surface. A grinder with roller attachments removes the last few millimeters. The rollers preserve the curvature and prevent the grinder from going too deep. The area is then given a final polish. One more thing.
In today's manufacturing processes, when you change tools or you change the process, it introduces errors. Like this is accounted for in our modern manufacturing processes, things like making turbine blades and stuff like that. And we don't see that sort of error here.
Expecting tool marks on visible surfaces of an art piece is misplaced, as most self-respecting artisans will polish them out. These are one-off art pieces, not industrial parts on an assembly line, where tool marks are left as they are. Let's now return to the question, could there have been a lathe in Old Kingdom Egypt, especially one robust enough to handle granite? Here's a history chart of the lathe. The first object that may have been turned on a lathe is from 1200 BC, but it's disputed. The first object accepted to have been turned on a lathe is from 700 BC. The first image of a lathe in ancient Egypt or anywhere is from around 340 BC. Here it is. Note that Egyptians didn't use perspective. The axes, which to us look vertical, were more likely horizontal, placed on the ground between the two men. It's a strap lathe, powered manually by pulling on two alternate ends of a leather strap or a cord. It doesn't tell us anything about the Old Kingdom. But here's an interesting fact. In Europe, there's a 2,000-year interval between an object turned on a lathe and the first depiction of a lathe. If we apply the same time yardstick to Egypt, it would in theory place the use of a lathe in the Old Kingdom. But there aren't any objects turned on a lathe from the Old Kingdom. Yes, but if the vases are authentic, couldn't they be such objects? If they are authentic, Occam's razor tells us to first consider lathes in the Old Kingdom, before jumping straight to a whole new civilization. With these images as a guide, let's see if a robust lathe in Old Kingdom was possible, using only techniques available back then. The grave goods of Khufu's mother, Hetepheres, provide great examples of the mechanical ability of Old Kingdom Egypt. Here's what we see. Straight, round wooden poles. Metal collars for such poles. Round wooden rods with curved profiles down their length. They can be made manually, but they're easier made with a template or some lathe-like approach. Wooden poles and short metal rods in metal-lined sockets. Wood joinery. Various metal hooks, rings, and trim. And rope-tied wooden beams. The components we've just shown are more than enough to make a heavy duty. Small areas of the collars may be cut and bent outward like teeth. Later on, this will prevent rotation. We make a two-part wooden frame. This part can slide into the other. We place the frame on top of a block heavy enough to not tip over. It may be part of the bedrock. On the block sides, opposite each other, two short beams are inserted into carved holes. The lathe is tied down to these beams with ropes. We place the rod with collars within the frame so that its ends fit within the small open spaces on each side. The insides of the small holes in the collars may be greased to prevent anything binding to the wood. We fill the small spaces around the collars with mortar and wait until it sets. We've done this with the ropes tied, as the tension may slightly affect the frame. We want perfect alignment when the lathe is in operation, that is, with the ropes tied. The granite block for the vase has been roughed out into a blank, similar to the blanks for Fatimid ewers. Roughing out was done with hardstone tools like these. Copper chisels were not used on granite. A flint chisel can work quartzite, which is slightly harder than granite.
Certainly more efficient than the bronze.
Seems to be working very well.
By the way, in Khufu's boat pit, a craftsman lost his tools. Bad for him, but good for us, as we get to see real tools used by a pyramid builder. A 6-inch flint chisel, a basalt grip hammer, and a water jug. Smaller granite pieces, like our blank, can also be directly hammer split on a scored trace line. This works best if the granite has good natural separation planes. Aswan granite is like this. This grandmaster splits granite into square blocks like a machine. Sometimes without bothering with trace lines. Sometimes with a single blow. This machine rapidly cracks granite cobblestones using this method. Granite splitting on a trace was shown with modern steel tools, but it may be feasible without. Here's how it could have been done. You find a hollow recess in the bedrock. You can square it up if needed. You insert your granite block, resting it on top of a hard stone with a sharp top edge. The block has a scored trace line. You lift a massive dolerite hammer, such as this one found in Lisht. You hit the block, splitting it. Other variations include sandwiching the trace line between two rows of small but tough dolerite pebbles, like this one, and bashing them with a hammer, etc. Returning to the granite blank, a vertical hole is drilled into the blank, similar to the Fatimid ewers. The hole is a bit wider than the lathe's axis. For more stability on the lathe, we can drill another shallower hole at the bottom, in extra stock left for this purpose. The extra stock will be later removed for a flat base. We untie the ropes, separate the two halves of the frame, and force the rod out of its collars. We cut the rod in two and remove an inch or two from the middle. The inner ends can be cut flat to prevent rotation. The outer ends are sanded just a tiny bit, so they can rotate within the collars without friction. The sanded ends can be oiled for lubrication. We put the lathe together. The inner ends of the rod halves go into the holes in the blank. They're immobilized within the blank with wooden wedges, mortar, etc. The outer ends go into the collars. We now have a lathe that can withstand significant forces. It has the strap design seen later in ancient Egypt, and it uses only mechanical components known in the Old Kingdom. There's no magic to working granite on a lathe. You simply need enough force to overcome the abrasion, and a rotational mechanism that can absorb these forces without wobbling. In our case, rotational accuracy is determined by how close we can fit the wooden shaft to the collars. The lathe will probably need 2 men to power it. The operator can use various abrasives, possibly mounted on a handle. For example, used up or cracked dolerite pounders. Polishing can be done with loose abrasive on a leather strap, a mat, etc. Depending on how smooth the interior needs to be, it can be hollowed out on the lathe or with other hollowing tools. As it's done today, the ring between the handles is carefully removed to within small distance from the surface. To finish this area, instead of a modern grinder with rollers, we can use a small, curved wooden block with 2 legs to prevent going too deep. The wooden block can have loose abrasive embedded on a leather strap, a mat, etc. One, are the vases authentic? 2. Did Old Kingdom or other relevant periods use lathe-like techniques? The first aspect is in a bad shape, with non-existing Czechoslovakian ambassadors, no documentation shown, an unlucky proximity to crystal skulls, and the world's long history of hoaxes trying to prove some pet theory. The second aspect is an even worse case, as it may not be resolvable at all. You'd have to prove that lathe-like techniques did not exist in the Old Kingdom. Proving a negative from 4,500 years ago is a tall order. Finally, an observation. As mentioned, the Vase scan team thinks of the Vases as a message between civilizations.
In some ways, the vase is similar to the golden record fixed to the side of the Voyager spacecraft. On the side of it is a golden record, with pictures and mathematics depicting our species, our technology, capability, and location.
Here are the most well-known images that can be called messages between civilizations. These messages are shown directly without hiding in some obscure proportions. We don't have to guess. Why doesn't the claimed lost civilization show itself just as directly? Why are its claimed messages blank and mute? Believers in ancient high-tech never fail to mention mineral boundaries in granite as supposedly a big technical problem.
They're not homogeneous materials. You go from
Crystal
feldspar
inclusions and
your feldspar to quartz to mica, hornblende, varying in hardness.
It's truly miraculous how Chinese workshops can churn out tens of thousands of granite vases each year without the mineral boundaries being a problem for them. Let's explain why it's not. Here's a cross-section diagram of a granite surface being abraded. Hard minerals are in red, soft minerals in green, in-between minerals in gray. It seems like believers in ancient high-tech always imagine some single sharp point digging into granite and carving out a groove into the surface. It's not how things work. Virtually all hard stone vessels ever made were shaped by abrasive particles, loose or fixed, driven quickly across the surface. At all times, the harder minerals, in red, and the biggest particles, keep the pressing surface away at a small distance. This distance keeps the damage to softer minerals in check. Why? Because the pressing surface can only get as close as the still undamaged hard minerals allow it to. As much as the pressing surface quote-unquote wants to damage the softer minerals, it can't, because the harder minerals stop it. The end result is that all minerals abrade at roughly the same rate. There are other pre-dynastic stone artifacts: arrowheads, knives, blades, mace heads, and pallets. In all categories, the objects show signs of being developed over time. The pallets probably started out as simple grinding stones, and they culminated in the famous Narmer piece. So why weren't these categories of stone objects inherited? Seems like the proposed ancient high-tech civilization left behind only vases, and no other useful, well-made stone tools.
With all the preparations complete, the experiment finally started on August the 15th, 2020. This is the diorite we'll be crafting our vase from. We've got a spare piece just in case, because we don't know what's inside. We assume that there must be a vase there. We're currently preparing the material to craft our hammers, because as you remember, we will be crafting with primitive tools. I'm holding some belts of raw hide. I'm twisting it just to make it easier to use later. Today we will soak it, tomorrow we will start crafting hammers. On day 13 of the experiment, an accident happened. A large piece broke off from the stone because it had a crack in it. As there was sand inside the crack, we figured it had been there before we started working it. Oh, that's what we were afraid of. Cracks like these can sometimes hold the piece together in the middle. It was holding it right about here, where here it'd been disintegrating for a long time. Good morning, Alexander. Sorry for disturbing you. We had a bit of an accident here. We broke the stone. Luckily, we had a spare piece of diorite just in case. But after some thought, Olga decided to keep on working the larger part of the broken stone. But the vase would have to be smaller than the one originally conceived. Cracked workpieces are a common issue at sculptors' workshops, even in the 21st century. You can stumble on loads of rejected pieces at modern stone processing workshops. But haters of the project were quick to make their spiteful remarks. Despite that, work continued, with us realizing full well that the experiment might end in failure at any moment. On September 24th, a mouse suddenly made the workshop its home. It ran inside. On May 12th, another mini accident occurred. A small piece broke off at the thinnest point. No problem, this part was supposed to be ground off anyway, but the axle is now harder to attach to the workpiece. On the 11th of April 2022, the Anthropogonist team visited the Egyptian Hall of the Pushkin State Museum of Fine Arts in Moscow. The museum staff was kind enough to open a display case with 5,000-year-old ancient Egyptian stone vases and allowed us to measure them, including one diorite vase. So we got a unique opportunity to compare ancient vessels with that being made by Olga. Here are the results of the measurements of one vase from the Pushkin Museum. And here is the data on Olga Vdovina's vase. As you can see, our unfinished vase is in the horizontal section closer to the perfect circle than the ancient Egyptian example. Similarly, compare the wall thickness in one of the sections. Here are the details of the museum vase. And here are the data for Olga's vases. Incredible! The upper walls of our vase are actually thinner than those of the museum item. This is very cool. This is exactly how our colleagues around the world work. And therefore, I would like to wish both this project and new ones great luck in the future. So, our project took a total of 2 years and 2 months to complete. Today is October the 14th, and the vase is finally done. We want to make the results of our experiments accessible to everyone. Pavel Krasnov created 3D models of all the 3 vases made by Olga Vdovina that we have made freely available.
One of them will be this paper Masters of Stone, Egyptian stone vessel from pre-dynastic times to the Middle Kingdom, W. Arnold Meyer. And what we have is that he is something of an expert in the field with a very comprehensive collection, and in this particular catalogue they show and detail the different types of vases, where they come from and their age, and they go to wherever they've been sourced ethically, within the law. Due diligence has been done, from they provide maximum amount of provenance of these types of things as well, and so we see great photos. So in regards to precision, a lot of now, for instance, the lug handles being not distanced properly, and from these are lovely. These are flasks, so I've never seen these before. They're not circular; they're like a flask. They're flattened on one side, and they're just great information into the different types of and particular ones again from this Arnold Meyer collection, and different types of stone, but. Scroll down a little bit further. Again, just from the photos of these, you can, the impossible machine precision, you can just discard that with a quick glance. No need for fancy machinery, but yes, this has been done now. They're all been numbered, and again, the details where they come from and so forth. And another cool feature about this catalogue is that it also gives us a set of terminology to describe the different styles of those. So, beaker, bowl, dish, plate, convex, conical, concave, cylindrical, slender, tall, globular or squat, but also raised blunt rim, sharp-edged rim, deeply undercut rim. And I'll show you, so these are from his collection that they've highlighted, but I'll show you in a moment and link as well. He's got an archive with excellent collection of all the major collections, private and museum collections around the world. But what's really cool is that we have, and they're all, you can cross-check them, they're all numbered, and we have CT scans. Now a CT scan is a pretty good device, pretty accurate, and what we see is they show the profiles, and very quickly, very obviously, the imprecision of these becomes very apparent, and also inconsistencies and deviations from true forms. That's a lovely one, number 16, which is like a bongo drum, 2 vases stuck together, which would had to have been shaped, without a drill or a lathe. The insides, yes, but the exteriors, no. And again, just from these CT scans, which is not some El Cheapo method, you get really good data. And so the standard of these vases, we have this large provenance collection from a world-renowned figure, and what we have is the defining feature, you could say, is imprecision, inconsistencies, wonderful pieces of art, but this, the newest thing is, laser scan precision vases. So we have this private collector who CT scans these, and they're not fighting. They'd be shouting it from the rooftops, but they, yet we have another collection, which are, of questionable provenance, let's say, as well, anything as they describe impeccable, and yet this small collection has all these precise vases. What are the chances of that? That a supporter of lost ancient technology for years, and lost ancient technology for years has been talking about the vases, showing those in the museums and such as these, saying precision, precision, and now they just like fell from this, like manna from heaven. How did they? Isn't that a wonderful coincidence? That's just marvelous how these things. It's nothing short of a minor miracle. Anyways, now
All 19 precision analysis are now published for the Petrie Museum vessels. The data seems to further point towards the tale of two industries, proposed by Uncharted X. Do keep in mind that these artifacts were Petrie's teaching materials. Sadly, though, Artifact Foundation is now trying to block my publications of the research reports. I'm going to present it all to you today. However, just a few hours ago, I received a legal demand letter from Karoli Poka, threatening legal action within the Trade Secrets Directive, EU 2016-943, should I as much as talk about these scans. Scans of ancient artifacts from our shared collective history are now by some regarded as trade secrets. There is power to be had if you can control the narrative and keep the Vase scans from the public. Apparently, these objects still induce greed and ownership fantasies in humankind, as they have probably done for millennia. The vessel scans were shared with me freely, and I was asked, without compensation of any kind, to run them through my new analytic software and create a precision report for each artifact. Apparently, Artifact Foundation now sees these reports, with my copyright information on them, as their private internal documents, not to be seen by others. They are now trade secrets. I have been analyzing the Petrie Museum scans for the Artifact Foundation for the last 5 months, 100% free of charge, freely sharing all findings and reports with them, answering all their questions about the analytical methods, etc. I agreed to carry out the work for free on the basis that I would publish the reports in my name. However, as soon as I mentioned it was time for my name to appear together with the reports, I was thrown under the bus with the final words. My suggestion is, if you want to demonstrate your work, use the STL file from the OG vessel. That was released. As has always been the plan, and as was the agreement with Artifact Foundation from the start, the reports will be released freely for all to see and use. They are now available under a Creative Commons license on my website. I hope everyone will use this new data to deepen our understanding. I have also uploaded an overview with the precision score and an overview of the circularity measurements on my website. This gives a good overall view of the findings in the Petrie Museum vessels.
Well, that was a lot to take in. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. Also, links to Night Scarab and SGD in the comments for more details. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to help us out. Cheers, and catch you later.